Welcome to Step Up to the Sport, a conversation series bringing together the minds of women's baseball and women in baseball. I'm Kate Haines, your host of today's conversation and the archivist for the International Women's Baseball Center. Today, we're joined by Amy McCann. Amy boasts more than 3 decades in the sport as a player and a coach, both domestically and internationally. She represented the Australian Emeralds for 12 years, bringing home silver in 2010 and bronze in 2014, with all-world team selections in 2004 and 2006. In her 11 seasons with the Victorian Aces, the team brought home 7 national titles. Amy has 20 years of involvement with the Doncaster Baseball Club of Melbourne, with 300 games as a player and 10 seasons in various coaching roles and club committee positions. Recently, she has joined the board of directors for Baseball Victoria, and last May, Amy became the first woman in Australia to call live broadcast of the Australian women's baseball team when they contested the Baseball Australia Women's Showcase. 2021 also marks the launch of McCann's newest venture, Women's Baseball, The Inside Pitch, a podcast available globally about players, coaches, and other women's baseball trailblazers. So welcome, Amy. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me.
I definitely don't know much about your baseball career, but we're definitely going to talk about it. I have been spending the last couple of days listening and catching up on your podcast, and I think that it's a really interesting venture to bring together, of course, some of the people that you've gotten to meet and play with, and talking about others as well. I remember in your 3rd episode, you had said something about talking. Your first 3 episodes covered 3 continents, and I know that you've picked up a 4th. So before we get too much into it, do you think that you are going to be covering maybe the 5th one soon, or any plans to talk to anybody in South America? Or I know Africa is not as developed in baseball as women's baseball as we'd like, but maybe you know some people there too.
Yeah, I definitely want to chat to as many countries and as many people as I can in women's baseball. Obviously, the language barrier does play a part, and that's on both sides. I mean, I'm an Australian, so we don't tend to talk a lot of languages down here apart from Australian, and many people have a hard time understanding what I say as an Australian, let alone trying to speak another language. So yeah, look, I've kept a close eye on particularly around the Venezuela and Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, with their leagues they've started recently. I'd love to have a chat to those guys down there because I think they're doing some really great things. And Venezuela, obviously in the last 10 years, have really become really knocking on the door to become a real push for a gold medal at a World Cup. But yeah, just keep going around the continents. It's so exciting that while we're small, we do cover a lot of the world. So it's exciting to chat to as many people as I can.
Yeah. I know that we've had a couple of conversations with some of the Latin American organizers, and that barrier can be a little rough, but you know, I think all of us speak the language of baseball, and so that helps a lot.
Exactly right.
All right, well, let's talk about these 3 decades of experience. So how did you get involved with baseball to begin with?
I think for a lot of people in Australia, your first taste of baseball came through T-ball, particularly through myself. T-ball back in the 80s was the biggest sport for kids at school. It was everywhere. There was like 500,000 people, I think, was some of the numbers were playing in the 80s. And you pretty much everyone played a form of a T-ball or a softball when they were, I guess, what you call elementary school. And you just, it was just a great way of getting bat and ball. We also had the option of playing cricket. Back in the 80s, women playing cricket was really not a thing unless you were really playing for Australia. And yeah, I just always loved swinging a bat and hitting a ball. I just loved hitting things hard. I had an older brother and obviously trying to keep up with him playing cricket, and my dad. Just started through primary school, and then my dad, I watched every sport I could, tried to play every sport, and my dad one day recorded a Major League Baseball game that was on at midnight. We only got them once a week back then in Australia, and he recorded it, and I watched it the next day, and I was like, what is this? I have to play it. And then said, Dad, get on the phone, quick, no internet again. I'm really aging myself here, but I basically got my dad to ring up, I think it was about a dozen clubs before they actually went, a woman, softball. Can you play softball? You really want to play? Okay, we'll take you. Most clubs said no before I actually got to take one. So one took me, which was a club called the Kissing Point Turramurra Angels in Sydney, and I always want to give them a big shout out. They're still around in northern Sydney, and they were the ones that gave me my first go at baseball when a lot of other clubs said no because I was a girl. So thank you to them.
Nice. Well, and it looks like in your baseball resume, you also have some cricket coaching experience. So that I think that's kind of cool too.
Yeah. It's funny. About 5 years ago, we were approached. Myself and my wife, Samantha Hamilton, who played for Australia as well for over a decade, they approached us to do some fielding coaching. Cricketers have been known to not be as good at fielders, or I guess it hasn't been an emphasis in their game as it is in baseball. So they asked us to come down and do some fielding coaching, and that quickly turned into filling in the threes when they were short. Then, hang on, you're pretty good at this. Can you play in the twos? And now you're playing in the ones, and I'm playing against all these international players. I'm like, no, I didn't come here for this, but I loved it. Great community. Really loved. We've done a couple of coaching courses now and worked across a whole bunch of ages and abilities and things, and bringing that back to baseball now. It's been something I wish I'd done earlier, in all honesty.
Yeah, that's definitely cool. I guess here in the US, cricket's not a big thing, so I always find it interesting to see that on. Even though I fully understand like the similarities in cricket to baseball or softball, I definitely know it's a game I don't understand in any high level. So
it's interesting though, because a lot of Americans think a lot of Americans think cricket is boring, and a lot of Australians think baseball is boring. They're so inherently similar.
Yeah.
Like a T20 game and a baseball game, the ball's in play the similar amount of times. I think the runs they score in cricket makes it different, which, yeah, I've never understood how we think they're so different, but they're so similar. So yeah. I love both.
Yeah. All right. And then you started playing for the Australian Emeralds and for the Victorian Aces in 2002. So what was that experience like, playing for Team Australia and then playing for, your regional teams and things like that?
Yeah, well, I guess if Australian women's team first started in 2001, I hadn't quite hit the scene then. And then I was just playing local ball in Melbourne, and someone said, you should go and play for Victoria. And I said, what's Victoria? And they went, oh, there's a nationals, there's an Australian team, there's everything. And I'm like, what? Okay, sure. And I didn't know the trials for the Victorian team had already taken place. So I trialed we had so many quality players back then. They actually had 2 Victorian teams in our state. It was actually amazing. And I actually trialed for the Victorian B team because the A team had already been selected. So I was selected to the B team and then went away to nationals and must have played really well. The Australian coaches went, yep, we need to have her. And I made the Australian team before I'd actually even made the Victorian official A team. So I didn't know anyone. I literally knew the girls I played. I played in a different grade to all the girls that played for Victoria. So I sort of first Australian squad training, I'm like, all these names. I'm like, oh, she's played for Australia. She's played for Australia. I was sort of a little bit of a deer in headlights meeting all these people for the first time. And that was 2002. And then there was a World Series in Florida in 2002 in September. And Australia went over there and won the gold in that one, which was really exciting. And then obviously that's where it all started, 2002, and for the next 12 years.
And so what was it like, you'd been playing in Australia for Melbourne. You ended up on, of course, Team Australia and started traveling internationally. So what was it like to be playing baseball with just women internationally?
It was actually really surreal. There was times where you pinched yourself. Here we were waking up, playing baseball, going to bed, knowing you're going to wake up and play baseball. It was just on repeat. And it was, while we only did it for a week or two here or there, like World Cups might be 2 to 4 week trips and nationals would be a week trip. You were a baseball player. You were like, for that week, for that 2 week period, you were a pro baseballer. That was your job. And it was amazing. And playing with women, I mean, I love playing men, with women, with men and women. It doesn't really matter. I just want to play baseball. But just having the same like-minded women, not just from your country, but from internationally. And that was what was so exciting, particularly in the first few years of the World Cup, is we didn't even know that we were just going over to play, and we didn't even know the opposition. Now we know because we can scout them. We've played them before. The first few years, we didn't know anything. It was just like, oh my God, we're going to play Japan. We're playing in a Tampa Bay stadium where the major league players play. I'm standing in a major league dugout and I'm playing Japan. This is the best day of my life. And it was just an amazing experience. All those trips was just, yeah, some of the best days of win or lose, some of the best days of my life. I'll never forget.
And then, you played for 12 years, and then you seem to have gotten the coaching bug too. So what was that transition like from playing to coaching?
I actually started before I finished playing. So I think because I had such a tough time trying to start baseball when I was a kid, I've always been, I guess, drawn to try and coach junior girls, giving that opportunity of getting not just an opportunity for them to get into baseball, but having a mentor and having role models of women that have played the game. And that's not something that I had growing up, because there was no generation before me. There was no, my idols were Colorado Silver Bullets. I'll never forget a TV show I saw with Gina Satriano, and there was a segment on her playing for the Colorado Silver Bullets, and I saw it when I was 14. So she was an idol. Madonna and Gina Davis playing baseball is one of my idols. So making sure I could give that opportunity for girls, I started doing that in about a couple of years into my Australian career. Actually started coaching junior girls here, which quickly developed into, from a club junior girls program, into the first ever under 15 girls state team that played at nationals in Australia. And from that team is a couple of girls who are currently playing for Australia, including Bronwyn Gell. So I've continued that through different levels, and now do a lot of coaching at Doncaster Baseball Club as well. So I just love seeing people improve, or seeing people be empowered, or seeing people just, whether or not they can hit a home run, or they just want to hit a single for the first time, or they're just getting a hit for the first time. It's just seeing people get so excited by achieving something on the field for the very first time, whether they're playing for Australia or they're playing for the thirds of their club, and that's whatever their goals are. I don't really care. The goal is to play baseball, and I'm more than happy to help them out. I love it.
Awesome. Well, and talking about that and the fact that you guys were the first generation of ball players, what changes have you seen in the game for women while you played and since?
Yeah, look, I think the significant change has been obviously just the amount of countries that are playing. I'll never forget the first World Cup. We only had 5 teams, and the 5 of us have been to obviously every World Cup, and now seeing countries having to fight their way into World Cups is really exciting. And knowing that you've got these countries now, that Chinese Taipei pushing on the door, Venezuela, countries like that are really like, no, it's not just the big 4, it's not just the big 2, it's not just Japan. We're here too, and I think we're going to see some really good things come out of some of those countries. Korea, someone I reckon we're going to see some big things from in the next decade. I just think things like that's the big change. Domestically in Australia, I think I started my career paying for absolutely everything we had to, whether it was playing for Australia, those jerseys on my wall, we paid for them. We paid for our flights. We paid for our nationals, our equipment, our physios, our doctors, everything. And that, my very, very last World Cup, I didn't have to pay to play. I didn't get paid, but I didn't pay. And I think that if it took 20 years to get to that point, then everything that my generation did to try and achieve that actually I feel was one of my biggest accomplishments, that I played that little part. And who knows where we'll be in 20 years. And we're talking about domestic professional leagues, semi-pro leagues here in Australia now for women, and that wouldn't have even been a thought 20 years ago. So while there's things I would have loved to have seen in my career, you just have to realize that every generation plays a part, and in 30, 40, 50 years from now, you know that you were part of that foundation.
Yeah, that's totally awesome. Especially understanding how long it takes for even professional organizations. I think the one that pops into my head, because it's happened in my lifetime, is like, Major League Soccer breaking even in the US. It took them like 25 years to be able to do that, and they still struggle with that. So the fact that you have seen that essentially developing for Team Australia, where, you're essentially doing pay to play, which is what amateurs do here in the US all the time, to seeing that development, where you guys have shown what you can do. You've gotten the backing for essentially, and that of course helps build for future generations. So that's really awesome. So with that, you've played internationally, you've played domestically, you've seen these changes. What are some of your most memorable experiences in
that? I think whenever there's probably 19 girls, when they get asked what their favorite memory, or most amazing memory from their career was, would have to say the 2010 World Cup. 2010 World Cup was, I don't think there's a word that can really sum it up. For those that are not aware, the 2010 World Cup, unfortunately, a player from the Hong Kong team was injured when a stray bullet hit her in the knee while she was fielding at shortstop during a warm-up. And we were in the crowds, and what ensued in the days after that, once we initially found out that she'd been shot, to government involvement, to the tournament being cancelled, then being back on, then being moved and things like that. It was, when you think about it back, it's 11 years ago now, you still don't believe it happened, because it was just like a scene from a movie. And it was just the most staggering moment, I think, for all of us. And the Australian team, something clicked with us and we bonded. And I guess being in a shooting situation in a country where you don't speak the language and your family isn't there, and you've just got 19 players and a physio and an EO and some coaches, and we just bonded and went on an absolute tear that we've never seen before, and we won a silver medal. So just can't. I spent a lot of my lockdown last year doing a documentary, doing a bit of an online piece on it, and it was just the memories that it brought back, without a doubt, that entire trip. And it wasn't just about the winning of the silver, and it was the first medal that Australia was able to pick up after coming fourth at the first 3 World Cups. And it was just so many things that went into that. But yeah, I think there's a lot of moments of, I think every World Cup has a different memory for me as well. I think every World Cup I had a different, either a different role, or we obviously had different teams and things like that. But I think if I had to pick one moment that was my absolute favorite moment, is every time we line up on the first base or third base line and they would play your national anthem. I still get choked up now. And just obviously having been at the Olympics and you hear that Australian anthem, I can still just put myself into that moment of arm in arm with your players. I actually think that, to me, was the best moments of my career, was just ready to play. 19 of your closest friends, best teammates, best players in the world all know as soon as you walk onto that diamond, you've all got that one goal, to have each other's back. And I think that, to me, that national anthem is always the best moment for me. I miss that the most.
Yeah. This going to international sporting events, I think that the anthem trading is one of my favorite aspects too, even as a spectator. I definitely remember the 2015 Women's World Cup. We had gone up to Ontario to watch it, and so being just a spectator as somebody not attached to any of the countries playing, it's really interesting to get to watch not just the teams but the other spectators representing their countries that way. So
yep.
All right, well, and then baseball, and I think sports in general, is big on nicknames, and it seems that you've got a couple too. Do you have any fun stories behind how you ended up with some of the nicknames that you have?
Not really. I think AMAC was pretty obvious when that first started. It was around the time that A-Rod obviously was coming up, so everyone was like, okay, you're AMAC. And Mudguts is actually Muddy is a name that one of my teammates who actually played on the 2010 World Cup team, Kathy Welsh, just gave me. She just wanted to call me Mudguts McCann, and it became Muddy, and it just something that stuck at the Doncaster Baseball Club. And yeah, I'm actually not sure where it came from, but I don't know. You know what? As long as they're cheering out for you and it's in a good way, people can call me whatever they want.
All right. And so one of the things that you've started to do now is, of course, this podcast. And so what made you want to start the podcast?
Well, the first thing I want to say, total disclaimer, is I didn't want to be another person with a podcast. It seems like everyone, either you brew a beer or you have a podcast, or it just seems like everybody has one. I was like, I was never ever going to do it. And then I think a few things happened. I think last year during lockdown, during that 10th anniversary, the video I did, and then Baseball Australia asking me to do the commentating on the Women's Showcase this year, which finally got up and running after a few COVID setbacks in May. So I was very privileged, lucky, and very excited and nervous to be able to call games live on television, not just into Australia, but also into overseas. And I knew I was going to enjoy it, but I didn't think I was going to enjoy it as much as I did. I actually was just like, this is the best thing ever. Like, just getting to talk baseball, watching baseball, women's baseball, like, everyone knows I would talk about women's baseball with sand in my mouth underwater. And I basically got out of it, and I was like on the flight home, and I'm like, I'm going to start a podcast. And I messaged this group, this inner circle group, and they were like, we were just waiting. We all thought it would take 2 weeks. We didn't think it would take a day. We knew you were going to do this. And we're like, okay. And look, it all came down to, I went online, and I couldn't really find anyone. And you guys do a great job. And there's a few out there that sort of talk to some people every so often. Like, they'll talk to an Isla Borders every 4 years, or they'll talk to a Tamara Holmes, or every second years they might pull out a World Cup interview. But I just think that consistent voice for women's baseball, international women's baseball, wasn't there. And having obviously been around it for 20 years, just knowing how many great stories there are from every country. And I don't even know them all. And I like to think I've got a really good baseball brain. So much of my head is filled. I think that's why I wear a 7 3/8, because I have so much baseball, women's baseball stuff in my head. And it was just like, I needed to, I think it's no point at being in my head. And I really want to share these amazing stories that I've seen in my time. And also I'm starting to actually uncover more as I go. And it's funny, I chose a sport where I have to pay to play, and I'm now choosing a what do you call it? My side hustle is not paying either. It's like, I keep going back to women's baseball. I have a saying in women's baseball, there's no crying in baseball. There's also no money in women's baseball either, but that is not, that's not why we do it. Anyone that plays women's baseball, look, if you'd said to me at the start of my career, here's an invoice for $150,000. That's probably what it's going to cost you for 20 years of playing for your country and for your state. But this is what you're going to do. Right. These are the experiences. These are the friends. This is what you're going to do. And be like, yep, how much? Monthly installments? What do you want me to pay it now? What do you want me to pay? So yeah, it just comes down to the fact that I just want to make sure that there's a voice for women's baseball. And if I want to be that voice, I don't really want to listen to myself, but I'm here. Hopefully that people can bear listening to me as I try and share the stories of all the women around the world, and not just women. There are some amazing men in baseball that have championed us for years. It's not just about women in baseball; it's about women's baseball as well. So I know I've only interviewed women to date, but we'll definitely be talking to some of the great people, some of the great men that have helped us get to where we are.
Yeah, no, we definitely feel the same way. And I feel like you've probably sat here and done it as well, especially, even us trying to set something up is, as much as we want to champion the international game, sometimes it's really hard to, set up across time zones, especially if you're talking with more than one other person. When I was setting this up, I would have normally had one of our normal hosts sit here with us, and I was like, you know what? I'm not going to even worry about that with our 10-hour time difference or 12-hour No, it's 10 hours. And stuff like that. But because we had done a few months ago, we sat down with a couple of Latin American organizers, Nicaragua, Dominican Republic, and then us. And, we were across like 4 different time zones, honestly. And it's just like setting that stuff up is really hard, as much as we want to champion the game. And of course it's not cheap to travel to those places either, even if it was a little bit more capable of happening right now. So
and it's also the research as well. I didn't, and while I think that I know, I don't know everything. I do have a lot that I know, but I also plan out my episodes, and I do a lot more research. Even on players I played against for 6 World Cups, I still do a heap of research. And then, as you would know, the amount of editing that goes into it, because you don't want just to half-ass it. You want to make it a good product. You want to make sure people really stick it through to the end. And again, it's not about us. It's about making sure they hear that full story of that person. And I didn't quite realize that every episode, the hours it takes before and after, and I had all these visions of doing it weekly. And then now sometimes it's even hard to do it fortnightly. And at the end of the day, if I don't get them out fortnightly and they go out every 3 weeks, as long as I'm doing them somewhat regularly, that's my goal.
Yeah, we did a monthly one for the first year that we had ours out. And then of course we had a lot more time, a lot more leeway and flexibility in our schedules. So that was easier. So like even now we're at, we get 4 episodes out, but we still want to consistently put them out. And I don't think that I quite realized how much goes into production. I had this idea that like when I launched episodes, all of the episode notes would be like out nice and organized and linked out, and we would have full transcripts, because I'm a huge proponent of accessibility. And I don't think that I've always gotten the episode notes out with the episode, but I don't think that we've finished transcripts in about 7 months. And so like that's always sitting there like, I got to get back to this, but I also need to edit the current episode.
I know. And then you get too finicky because you're like, I'm going to cut out all my ums, which I found out that I say a lot. So I've got to get all my ums out. And then you just want to make sure that they sound as smart or as I guess as good as they can be as well. You don't want to put anything out and I'm a perfectionist when it comes to it. And every episode I'm just like, I have dreams that I just record and post, and I'm not there yet. But it's fun. It's actually, it's just fun letting conversations develop as well. I'm learning. I know I've got my script, but then at times I just go, no, hang on, you tell me more about that. And I find you don't want to go over the hour, but sometimes you do. You're halfway through a conversation, you're like, oh, this could be a 2-parter for 2 hours. But
I think one of my favorite episodes is, it definitely comes in at like an hour and 15 minutes, but I would sit and listen to it. And I remember that we continued talking to that guest like 2 hours after we had finished recording, because we just didn't want the conversation to end.
Well, and that was the same, Veronica Alvarez, I know we chatted for like an hour nearly, I think, after it, and our podcast went for well over an hour. And I've listened to that podcast a couple of times since, because her stories are just so great. I'm like, I interviewed her and I still listen to it. So
Well, and I think that I've come off on trying to be that perfectionist a little bit, because I think some of the humanness of error in those conversations really pulls those types of things out. So there's not a lot of editing that goes into the conversation itself, unless our Zoom link drops, or we've stopped and repeated something a couple of times. So I definitely have taken a little step back on that, because I think that it kind of shows the humanness of our conversation, really. Which
I think has come a lot since COVID too. I think the pre-COVID, I think what we've seen now with everyone being at home, with videos, with portrait videos, out of focus, people sort of video phones and you can only see half a head. People are just used to that now. And I think a lot of that, if you see that content online on TV, it's just more natural now. And I think the quality of what people accept now is a lot lower, but I think that this quality might be in visual appearance might be less, but I think, as you just said, that conversation, that connection is so much better.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so as player, as coach, as podcast host, as committee member, what players did you play against or with, or just in the international game at all, that you think everyone needs to know about?
Oof, good Lord. How much time do we have? Wow. It's probably, I think everybody's opinion on who was the toughest player you've ever played with or against is, and going through each of my World Cups, it's like every World Cup had a different player that was harder. I think of Tomomi Nishi from Japan. I think of, obviously, Saito from Japan, Tamara Holmes, Marta Sementelli. Some of these players that have dominated repeatedly at World Cups, I think, are clearly someone like Amy Saito from Japan at the moment. What she's doing in women's baseball is just unheard of. And we've had amazing pictures in, as I said, Marty Sementelli, Simone Wern, Jacinda Barclay, Lucinda Cashman. We've had a lot of great pictures, and Saito is lights out. And if she was a soccer player, if she was a basketballer, she would be known around the world. And I'm lucky I get to play one World Cup against her. I got to walk against her. It's like, I think, my career highlight. I don't know if I faced her at best though. So yeah, I think Saito is someone who we all know who she is, but the rest of the world should, because she is an absolute superstar. And I think, look, there's some players, obviously, Ashley Stevenson's, Kate Soda, people like that have played 8 World Cups, who retired, who are now stepping back into a coaching rank. It's players like that we like to, while they're not playing anymore, those names, you want people to know they're an amazing coach now, but they were also an amazing player for 20 years. People, yeah, things like that. But I think, honestly, I think it's Saito. The world should know her name.
Yeah. Well, and I think even those, okay, they're coaches now, but, we didn't know about their playing career. It also helps remind people, we've been playing forever, actually. And you need to know those names to really understand that. So we can get to a place where the Satos of the world are known in the same way that our basketball players, our soccer players, footballers.
It's funny how, while I get older, and no one wants to get older, and you look at some of the ages and the date of births of some of the players playing in a World Cup, and some people might make comments about people being certain age and still playing in a World Cup or still playing baseball. I mean, the baseball diamond doesn't know how old you are. That's one thing. But the other thing as well is, I actually think it's really exciting, the fact that, like, just at the last Women's Showcase, when I was speaking to all of the players before the showcase, and I wanted to know more about some of the younger girls I didn't know, and I was asking them, who's your baseball idol? Who's your baseball idol? And they were naming girls in the Australian women's team. So some of the catchers were naming Tani Lovering, and it was like, this is, to me, that was the best thing, one of the best things I could see, because I couldn't name, as I said before, I was naming Isla Borders and Gina Satriano and people that played 50, 60 years ago. Girls are naming girls they're playing now, and then they get to walk out in the field with them. And that, to me, I think that generation, that is so exciting. Like, and look, there's girls there that I didn't even know that come up to me and go, "Oh, I know who you are. You were like the best centre fielder I've ever seen." And I'm just like, what? Okay, this is cool. This is awesome. It just means that if you have an influence now, if I have an influence on 1 or 100 girls to play or to stay in the game, regardless of how good they are and what level they want to play at, that is so cool. I love that.
That is awesome. All right, so we're coming up a bit on our time. So I kind of want to finish this a little bit talking about kind of those interpersonal relationships. We create these bonds with our teammates, which just make the game so much better to play. And I know that we had talked a little bit before we started recording about, you played with your wife for almost the entire time that you were playing with Team Australia and stuff like that. So can you talk about some of those relationships and kind of how they've continued into today, and essentially,
Yep.
you know, I know that you've talked with some of your teammates and whatnot on your podcast, you know, and of course those relationships that you've created internationally as well. So
Yeah, well, I guess the first thing with my wife, we met through baseball, very early on, back in 2002. So very privileged to play my entire Australian career with her. I played one more World Cup than her, and it was very odd not having her there, not just for me, but for the team as well. She was so synonymous, Samantha Hamilton, with anything in women's baseball in this country. And then we married a few years later. So entire careers, I mean, it was so amazing to be able to do that, but also do it in such a welcoming way. In Melbourne baseball, Victorian baseball, Australian women's baseball, it was we've never ever experienced anything other than positivity towards, I guess, us in a same-sex relationship and things like that. So it's very open. I think women's baseball in this country, which is fantastic. And then just the relationships you develop with players all around the world, it completely varies, and it can be challenging at times, because when you have 20 girls from all around the country put together, sometimes you're never going to get along with everyone, and pockets of friends, pockets will form from whether they've known each other, states, or things like that. But the one thing that we all have in common is, as soon as we hit that baseball field, we step over those white lines, everybody has the same goal, and then you can step off the white lines, and it's those different dynamics of learning the different personalities of players, which I think we needed to do more of in our careers. Obviously, there's people who have different personalities, and learning how you deal with people, I think all teams need to do more of. That was really exciting, but we never really jumped on that a little bit as much as we should. But yeah, just meeting people overseas, and you might meet them once, you might play against them for one World Cup or 6 World Cups, and then you know that you can message them 15 years later and go, hey, I don't know if you remember me, but I played against you when you kicked our ass at the first 2 World Cups. Do you want to do a podcast? That's pretty much how I introduced myself to Donna Mills. You were awesome, and I was on the bench in my first World Cup, and you won and we didn't. Do you remember me? Can I talk to you? And it's just like, yeah, it's I think we said earlier, like, we speak the language of baseball, and really understanding that we're only here just to help that voice of women's baseball and get that story out more. So, I mean, I regret not probably having more relationships or making more time to connect with more teammates. But it's hard when you're in an amateur world, when you're sort of coming in and out, like your club teams in Australia, you spend 6 months of a year with your club team, and then your state team, and then the Australian team. You sort of spend less with people the more you go higher. And then when we all work full time, it's just really hard to find time. And then you retire and you're like, oh my goodness, really want to do this. And it's about reconnecting, I think, once you're retired as well. And I'm a big fan of alumni programs and alumni groups. I'd love to get one started in Australian women's baseball, because we've had 100 girls, I think, play for Australia in 20 years. And I could count on well less than 2 hands the amount of girls that are still involved in a coaching board level, some type of role at a state or an international level. And I think that's really sad. A lot have gone off, gotten married, had kids, continued with their careers, because we obviously had to work alongside playing for Australia. And I think that we need to reconnect the community, because we can't just play and then leave. The community is too small as it is, if that makes sense. I know it was a very long answer, so I apologise, but you can edit that as you see fit.
No, I think that is exactly what we're looking for. You know, I know that there are alumni associations for some organizations, and you know, some are more used than others. You know, but yeah, it's really important. Just in general, the women's baseball community is relatively small, so being able, even, you know, once every 4 or 5 years, to connect with people is, I think, really important to continue, again, placing that we are here, we've been here, and we're continuing. You know, have some of those young Team Australia girls meet the Amy McCanns of the last couple of years. So I think that that's really important, and of course the relationships, the history, yes, that's what the IWBC is all about. Trying to make sure we make those connections, especially internationally, to show we are all in this together. We're all promoting this together. So I really thank you for taking the time to sit down with me, even though it did take us a little while to find some time to do so. And I hope that the relationship with you and the IWBC continues. I know that Dr. Williams and Dr. Heapy have definitely they know about you. I know that they're interested in continuing to work with people all around the world, and so is the rest of our organization. So thank you so much for sitting down with us today.
No, thank you very much. I just shout out to everybody at the IWBC for what you guys are doing, and a proud member. And as I said, I love connecting with everyone overseas. And yeah, just keep up the great work you're doing. And thank you so much for having me on. It was a privilege.
Are you interested in keeping up with Amy? Follow her on social media at Amy McCann on Twitter and at Amy McCann31 on Instagram. You can also check out her podcast at womensbaseball.insidepitch.podbean.com. While you're at it, you can keep up with the IWBC at IWBC4Me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. If you're interested in becoming a member or are interested in making a donation to support our continued work, please visit our website at internationalwomensbaseballcenter.org. If you liked our episode and are curious about our other digital content, don't forget to like and subscribe to IWBC Archive on YouTube. Thank you again for joining us for Step Up to the Sport. And thank you again to Amy McCann for sitting down with us. Keep an eye out for new and upcoming content, and don't forget to step up to the sport.